Today our case brings us to Northern Ireland, to a small town, Omagh, in County Tyrone. I would first like to introduce you to the town and then to our victim, and how her life was ended by an absolute monster. Omagh town has a population of just over 20,000 people and was founded as a town in 1610. In 1768, Omagh replaced Dungannon as the county town of County Tyrone. It is 68 miles to the west of Belfast and is 34 miles to the south of Derry. While Omagh has a rich history, I guess it was put on the international map for all the wrong reasons on the 15th of August 1998, when the real IRA exploded a car bomb in the town centre. 14 women, including one pregnant with twins, were killed, along with 9 children and 6 men. Hundreds more were injured. While this day will be forever etched in the memories of the people of Omagh, Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland and the UK, Omagh would build its town again from the ground up. Today it is a vibrant, beautiful town. It is the main retail town for Tyrone due to its central location and has many shopping areas such as Great Northern Road Retail Park and the Showgrounds Retail Park. Oasis Plaza was also completed in 2015, which gave a facelift to the riverbank and many people enjoy it today. I would safely say Omagh town is definitely worth a visit. But before the horrific events of August 1998, another tragedy hit Omagh in April of that same year: the murder of 17-year-old Sylvia Fleming. Sylvia was born in October 1980. She was the youngest of 3 sisters. Josie was the eldest and Kathleen was the middle child. The 2 older girls were initially raised by their father, but when Sylvia came along, he couldn't cope anymore, and he put all 3 girls into the foster care system. I could not find anything about their mother. She seems to be left out of the media, which is fine. The 3 girls were fostered together, which was good, but they had been physically abused while in care. Josie, because of this, was very protective and took on the role of being a mother to them as best she could. The 3 girls relied heavily on each other in order to get through it. Josie would later say, quote, "They meant the world to each other." Sylvia would have been considered vulnerable, and she found it hard to pick friends that would be good for her. She would do anything for approval, to be loved, and so this made her open to being taken advantage of. But despite all this, and with the support of her sisters, Sylvia worked hard at school. She was very good with her hands, and so in 1997, when she left school at 16, she went on to train as a hairdresser. When she finished her course, she changed paths and began working in a nursing home. Then Josie would find herself pregnant, and Sylvia was so excited to be an auntie. Josie got her own place soon after and invited her 2 sisters to move in with her. The 3 amigos back together again, under the one roof, with many hands on deck to help with the new bundle of joy. Life was good for the trio. In December 1997, Sylvia, at the age of 17, would meet a man 9 years her senior. His name was Stephen Scott. He was 26 and worked as a part-time firefighter and was big into bodybuilding. He and Sylvia had met at a party at his flat. Stephen showered Sylvia with attention and gifts, basically what we would call love bombing. Sylvia was excited to tell her sisters about him, and they would say she seemed to be genuinely happy. Stephen had recently moved from Newry to Omagh. His nickname was Bulldog, referring to his short but stocky build. He commanded respect and gave an air of being all macho. He tried his hardest to appear popular and upright, but his peers saw through him. He was not liked. Josie, Sylvia's sister, saw right through him and never warmed to him, and she didn't hide it. This did not sit well with Stephen. Josie would say that Stephen constantly needed attention, to be the centre of whatever was going on. He was very vain and was always flexing his muscles and always being loud. But Josie was not the only person who saw through him. Many others did also, especially those of the same age group as him. His work colleagues couldn't stand him, full of himself, telling tall tales, so basically a bullshitter. So to compensate this, Stephen would surround himself with young teenagers, male and female, and this is how he met Sylvia. He would have house parties at his flat for his young teenage friends and provide drink and drugs. The teenagers idolised him, and this suited Stephen down to the ground. Sylvia saw him as a good bet. He was charming, had a good job, and popular with her friends. She didn't see the red flags straight away, and she felt safe with him and idolised him. But our Stephen was a master manipulator amongst the impressionable teens, and Sylvia was no exception. It was clear he desired power, and this he was able to get. Soon Sylvia began to spend less and less time with her sisters and more with Stephen. He would try and put himself between Sylvia and her sisters and became very controlling of her. Sylvia was becoming more and more isolated. Along with what we know of Stephen already, he was totally obsessed with serial killers. Ted Bundy and Charles Manson among his favourites. He looked up to them and wanted to be like them, charismatic, leaders, and exert control over the people around him. By February 1998, Sylvia moved into Stephen's flat. Now he had full control over her, and her friends started to notice how abusive he was towards her. He would demean her in public, and slowly but surely, he took away her self-confidence. While he did this, he still was able to maintain the persona of a good guy amongst the teenagers that already idolised him, some even joining in on the torment of Sylvia. Soon his control over her was all-encompassing. He treated her like she was a plaything, and this included their sex life as well. He was into sadistic and controlling sex. Sylvia would tell her friends that once he tried to put a pillow over her face, she panicked as she couldn't breathe. Stephen had so much control over her at this stage that she complied with his every wish, in and out of the bedroom. She thought he loved her, but was very frightened of him and also wanted to please him. Bondage and demeaning acts were prevalent in their sex life. He got pleasure through her suffering and pain. In March 1998, Sylvia discovered she was pregnant and told Stephen. He was not well pleased. He did not want a long-term relationship, and a baby was out of the question. Stephen broke up with Sylvia and said the baby wasn't his, that she must have been seeing someone on the side. She moved out of the flat soon after. Sylvia moved in with a friend but continued to see Stephen. She wanted him back and so would do anything to fix things between them. Of course this suited Stephen, and he made the most of having this control over her. On Friday the 3rd of April 1998, Sylvia received her first paycheck from the nursing home she worked at. She decided to celebrate. She had a few drinks with her friends where she was staying at the time. She then left the house to go over to Stephen's flat. Poor Sylvia was never seen again. That night, Stephen was in his flat drinking with two 14-year-olds, a boy and a girl. He told them he planned to kill Sylvia that night, and the teenagers' response was they thought he was joking. No one in their right mind would think he was serious. Sylvia obviously had no idea of Stephen's intentions, and so when he rang her to come over, she gladly did. She was hoping that this would be the night he would take her back and begin their lives together, to become a little family. When she arrived, all four had a drink together in the living room. Then Stephen took her into the bedroom. He applied her with sleeping tablets as well as more drink. He then proceeded to tie her up, binding her legs and arms and tying her to the bed. He then put duct tape around her head, covering her mouth, nose and eyes. Then Stephen injected her with insulin, and he would be later asked why he did this, and he would say, quote, to see what would happen to her. Between the insulin, sleeping tablets and drink, Sylvia was now like a zombie. Stephen had full control over her now and could get her to do anything he wanted. But Sylvia in this state did not last long, and she soon slipped away and died. During interviews with police, Stephen would give different versions of what happened. As you all know, people like him are pretty scarce with the truth, and by keeping the truth to themselves, it keeps the control. Stephen said that he brought the two teenagers into the bedroom to show them his work. He revelled in what he had done to Sylvia and also wanted to humiliate her more by showing the teenagers her bound and naked body. It also flexed the power he had over the teenagers, showed them what he was capable of, and he knew they couldn't or wouldn't tell anyone of what he had done. He said to the boy and girl that they were now accomplices to the murder and that they would be implicated. He told them that he needed to get rid of the body and they were to help him to avoid this happening. The next morning, they wrapped Sylvia's body in a blanket and helped carry her to the attic. Then the three went swimming. When they returned to the flat, they took £25 from Sylvia's pockets, the money she had received as her first paycheck. He used this money to buy a hacksaw and black bin bags, along with cleaning products. They then brought Sylvia down from the attic and put her in the bath. Stephen then cut Sylvia up into 8 pieces. The pathologist would state later that the body was cut up very precisely. It was done with care and attention, almost like time was taken in doing this terrible deed. It was like the perpetrator revelled in the cutting up and wanted to savour every last moment. The pathologist said there would have been a huge amount of blood at the scene. On the Saturday, Josie and Kathleen were worried as they had not heard from Sylvia all day and knew that she had not returned to her friend's house where she was staying. The friend had told the sisters that Sylvia had received a phone call from Stephen and she had gone over there the night before and hadn't returned. Josie reached out to Stephen straight away, but he did not answer his phone. But Josie kept trying and eventually he answered. He told her he hadn't seen Sylvia in days. On Sunday the 5th of April, the two sisters took a walk down to Stephen's flat to confront him face to face, as they felt he had done something to Sylvia. They knocked on the door, he answered and let them in. Stephen led them into the bedroom and sat on the bed where he had just murdered their sister. He was red-eyed and upset sitting there, and when Josie glanced up at the attic, Stephen saw her and became uneasy straight away, and so led the two out of the bedroom. He became agitated and started to repeat himself. Josie said later that in that moment she knew he had something to do with Sylvia disappearing. Eventually Stephen shut the women down, told them he had no idea where Sylvia was and that he had not seen her on the Friday night. It was then he told them to leave. As they were leaving, they noticed black plastic bags on the floor of the flat, but what they didn't know, it was Sylvia cut up in those bags. How absolutely horrifying. After the sisters left the flat, they reported Sylvia missing to the RUC, which was the Royal Ulster Constabulary at that time. Stephen offered to help in the search once Sylvia was reported missing, but first he had to go about disposing of her body, along with the help of the 14-year-old boy. A house nearby was being renovated on the circular road in Omagh, and it is here where they decided to dispose of Sylvia. He knew his flat would be the first to be searched, so he needed somewhere nearby to quickly get rid of the body. He carried the body parts of Sylvia across the town of Omagh with the help of the boy. Stephen refused to carry the head and the torso himself, as he said he had a bad back. So much for being a bodybuilder. But the 14-year-old was able to manage it. A massive search in the meantime was launched for any sign of Sylvia. Houses, lanes and alleyways were checked, and Stephen joined in, doing his best to help in the search, even walking with Josie past the house where he had buried Sylvia, saying, quote, "Don't go up there, you never know what you might find." He seemed to get a kick out of what he knew, the family not being able to push him and not really knowing if he knew something. Stephen knew this and played on it. Later though, Stephen not being able to hold back and wanting to boast about what he had done to Sylvia, he told a 20-year-old friend, Rigby, what he had done. This friend was in England at the time, and when he returned that same weekend, he had helped get rid of the rest of the body. Apparently not all of the body parts had been gotten rid of by Stephen and the 14-year-old. It took 2 weeks after Sylvia was reported missing for Stephen's flat to be searched. The RUC definitely dropped the ball on this one. By then, the flat was thoroughly cleaned. Sylvia's clothes had been burnt, and all the body parts had been cleared out of the flat. There was no evidence of wrongdoing, including in the attic. The police at this stage suggested that Sylvia had run away after all. The search, though, continued. On the 30th of May 1998, Stephen's friend Rigby was arrested in Omagh for brandishing an air rifle, which back then could have got him shot. It was said that he wanted to get arrested and questioned about Sylvia. Seemingly, his conscience got the better of him, and he wanted to tell what he knew. When he was arrested, he told the police everything and his part in the murder. He took the police to where they had put poor Sylvia. When the police entered the half-built house in the housing estate, the smell hit them. They knew straight away that there was indeed a body somewhere in the house. They lifted the floorboards and saw that the damp course had been cut and the soil had been removed. There, under the soil, when pushed aside, they found the first part of Sylvia's remains. The family were notified straight away that part remains had been found in a house on the circular road, and to prepare themselves for the worst. Josie clued in straight away on the word part and questioned what they meant. All she thought was, quote, "What happened to my sister?" Sylvia had to be identified by dental records after her body had been recovered from the house, 8 pieces in total. The family were distraught. Stephen Scott and the two 14-year-olds were arrested without delay, and word got out at how Sylvia had been found dismembered. This news and news of the arrests sparked a 3-day riot in the town. Stephen's family home and the teenagers' homes were petrol bombed. The Good Friday Agreement had just been signed, and so feelings were running high at the time. The Flemings appealed to the public to stop, that no more blood should be shed, that it was enough that they had lost Sylvia, and that they didn't want anyone else to suffer the pain they were going through right now, to let justice take its course through the judicial system and not by vigilante means. Stephen Scott thought he was important and a respected member of the community, but he wasn't a member of the community. He was a blow-in, an interloper who had killed one of their own. Not just one of their own, but a pregnant 17-year-old girl who had a tough start in life but did her best against all odds. She did well in school, trained to be a hairdresser, working with the elderly, and most of all keeping a close connection with her family. He is blessed the police got hold of him before anyone else did, if you get my drift. Stephen denied everything in his first interview, saying he had not seen Sylvia since late March. He said he had phoned her on the evening of the 3rd of April to come over, but she never turned up. In the second interview, he said that he had seen her on the morning of Friday and again on Saturday morning, and they had sex on both occasions. But by the third interview, he said she had shown up on the Friday night, but he hadn't seen Sylvia, as the 14-year-old girl had answered the door. He finally told the police in the interview that Sylvia had shown up, and he did see her. He said that he had tied Sylvia up as a joke and tied a rope around her neck. After a time, 30 minutes to an hour, he decided to inject her with insulin. He then called the 2 teens in, and the teen boy yanked the rope, strangling Sylvia in the process, while he and the 14-year-old girl stood chatting in the same room. He would also go on to say that he called the 2 teens into the bedroom, and while he was going to the bathroom, the young teen yanked on the rope, and she was no longer breathing when he got back. He did admit to dismembering Sylvia and hiding the body under the house, as the 3 of them panicked when she stopped breathing. But considering his actions afterwards, I'd say different. He showed no panic in his actions. He wrapped Sylvia in a blanket and put her in the attic and went swimming. He then took her down from the attic, put her in the bath, and cut her up in a meticulous way, as stated by the pathologist. When forensics examined Stephen's flat for the second time, they found blood and DNA in the pipes of the bathroom, and determined that the whole bathroom would have been a bloodbath. Stephen was arrested and charged with Sylvia's murder. The 20-year-old and the 2 14-year-olds were charged with perverting the course of justice and conspiracy to the unlawful burial of a body. The trial was set for March 2000. In the meantime, 2 autopsies were performed on Sylvia to try and determine her cause of death. She was eventually returned to her family and was buried on the 5th of June 1998. More than 1,000 people attended her funeral. A guard of honour by the pupils of the school she once attended stood by the doors of the church to honour her and escort her on her final journey. The priest that officiated spoke of how deeply affected the community were by her death, but asked the people not to continue the violence that had erupted in the wake of her murder. He described Sylvia as caring and considerate. Sylvia's whole family attended her funeral, including her mother, and her father helped carry her coffin. When the trial began in March 2000, the harrowing details of Sylvia's death was laid out for all to hear. The family, friends, reporters, members of the public and jurors all piled into the courtroom, and tears fell when they heard the inhumane way Sylvia was treated just before her death, during and after. There wasn't a dry eye in the place, such were the details. Sylvia's family sat directly behind the accused. Stephen pled not guilty and stuck to his story, blaming the killing on the 14-year-old boy. He did not take to the stand, but his statements and interviews with the police were read out to the jury. He claimed it was a sex game gone wrong, but the pathologist claimed it was death by asphyxiation, caused by the taping of Sylvia's face, or possibly by strangulation, with or without a ligature. He said with the condition of the body, it was impossible to be definitive in his report. It was also noted that despite Stephen being a firefighter and trained in CPR, he made no attempt to help Sylvia and no ambulance was called. Stephen also stated that it was the young teenagers that suggested they cut up the body to get rid of it, and it was the young girl that went to the shop to get the black plastic bags, hacksaw and cleaning supplies. And so poor Stephen, a grown-ass man, was bullied into the cover-up of a murder by 2 teenagers. In this interview also, he said he couldn't remember saying he was going to kill Sylvia, but if he did say it, it was just a joke, and maybe the teenagers had picked him up wrong. When it came to confessing to his friend Rigby, he told him that it was the teenagers that killed Sylvia, but did admit that he did inject insulin into her. From here, I won't go over everything that was said in the trial, as I would only be repeating myself. On summing up, the judge spoke by saying, quote, "What then are the circumstances of the prosecution relied upon? Firstly, the deceased died in the accused's bedroom. You may feel no doubt about that. Secondly, by the accused's own admission, he tied her up and left her tied up for an hour. Thirdly, and it being a matter for you to decide if it has been established through the evidence, he encircled her neck with a rope without any coherent reason to do so. Fourthly, he said he interrupted his sexual session with the deceased to go to the bathroom. He didn't release her, he didn't remove the tapes from her face or allow her neck to be free from the rope, and then he invited the 2 teenagers into the room. Fifthly, he left the victim trussed up while he engaged in a conversation with the female teenager, and while the male teenager was at the head of the bed pulling on the rope. You may consider this a likely scenario, a likely circumstance you are willing to accept." The judge, in summing up, also noted the humiliation and degradation caused to Sylvia before and after her death. He said she had been callously discarded. On the 13th of March 2000, Stephen Scott was found guilty of the murder of Sylvia and dismembering her body and concealing it. The 14-year-old boy was found guilty of dismembering the body and concealing the body. Rigby, the 20-year-old, was found guilty of concealing Sylvia's body. The 14-year-old girl was cleared of all charges. On the 5th of April 2000, Stephen Scott was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 19 years. Both male accomplices were sentenced to 2.5 years for concealing the body of Sylvia. Obviously, the 14-year-old didn't get a sentence for helping cut up the body. Stephen sought to appeal his conviction but was refused in late 2000. He also went on to appeal the length of time he was to serve as back then in the UK a sentence for murder was a minimum of 12 years. The defence claimed it was at a lower end of intent, and so the sentence should be lower, that the maximum sentence for perverting the course of justice by dismemberment was 5 years. So in total, the sentence at maximum should have been 17 years and not 19 years minimum. Submissions were put forward by Sylvia's family in this appeal. Her father spoke along with her two sisters. The court did not accept Stephen's arguments. The judge said that Sylvia was very much under the influence of Stephen and had submitted to being tied up, etc., adding the non-consensual application of insulin. The court also found Sylvia was extremely vulnerable, and therefore this attracted the higher starting point of a minimum of 15 to 16 years sentence for murder. At the beginning of July 2017, Stephen was spotted at his mother's home near Newry. He was on the pre-release programme in prison, and he would soon be released on licence back into the community. He was quickly forced to move when it was discovered that he had returned. Later, in 2017, he was housed by Northern Ireland Probation Service in Belfast, and he had been spotted out and about there. When it was first heard of his release, the Fleming family urged the probation officers not to allow him to return to Omagh or visit Sylvia's grave. A public meeting was called on word of Stephen's pre-release in July 2017 in Newry. The victim support group told the public that they had received a letter from Stephen assuring them and Sylvia's family that he would not go to Omagh, and he apologised for what he had done. By Christmas 2018, Stephen was released on full licence. Rigby served just 8 months out of his 2.5-year sentence. The 14-year-old boy served just 5 days behind bars. In April of 2023, Stephen Scott appeared at Lisburn Magistrate Court by video link from prison after facing allegations that, having been sentenced to a term of imprisonment of 3 years or more, purchased, acquired, or had in possession a firearm or ammunition. Stephen Scott was working on a farm, and he had been asked by his employer to try to get weaponry to deal with vermin on the farm, which breached the terms of his licence. The detective dealing with the case spoke to Stephen's boss and was unsure whether the employer directed him to get a firearm or build a firearm for vermin control. But he was in control of quite a lot of ammunition, he said. Stephen was kept on remand for a further week. As a result of the charge, the Department of Justice has revoked the life licence. In court, the judge adjourned the case to October 30th, 2023, to fix a date for the legal step necessary to elevate any criminal case to the Crown Court. So I guess the streets are safe again for the time being. To this day, the family are heartbroken, like many other families of loved ones. I'm just glad that Rigby grew a conscience and told where Sylvia was buried. A very sad case, and one I won't forget in a hurry. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you like the content. It's a great help to the channel.